Already, good morning. This is Axel Merk, President Chief Investment Officer of Merck Investments, with my morning update here. Lots of things happening today around the world. Um, First, a brief thing on the markets. Markets are happy right now. Dow S&P futures are up 53, and bonds are weaker. The 10-year is down 11 ticks, the 30-year point and 20 ticks. The 10 years at 67 basis points, and 3-month T-bill is at, if I find it on my screen, 1 month is 4 weeks is at 4 basis points, 3 months is 11 basis points, and 3 months LIBOR is at 54 basis points. The effective Fed funds rate is still at 5 basis points. Pointed out this morning, just retweeted Nick Reese's tweet. He's one of our senior analysts and portfolio managers, that lending conditions are tighter. And so let's just keep that in mind. While big business does have access to money, overall lending conditions are tight. The other day, we had Wells Fargo say they're not issuing any new HELOCs. If you have an existing HELOC, you can tap a line, but you're not able to put a new one in place. Apparently, other banks have done that as well. That's something that does happen in economic downturns, and that contributes to tighter lending conditions. The rest of the world had a kind of a catch up here as well. Overall, happy first on the bonds. So that kind of mixed. One of the things I'll go into here in a second, spreads are widening in the Eurozone a little bit. But before I mention that, let me just give you a rundown here of the equity markets around the world. If my Bloomberg were a little faster, here we go. Euro Stoxx 50 up 1.7%, the FTSE up 1.9%, the CAC 40 in France is up 2.1%, the DAX 1.9% up, the Nikkei was down 2.9%, and in Hong Kong was up 1%, China was up 1%, a little over 1%. And so, and in the currency markets, decidedly mixed currencies. The euro is one of the weaker currencies, may also be related to that widening spreads. The NOK, the Norwegian kroner, is the strongest currency in the major currency space. And on that note, crude is having a good day. West Texas crude is now at 24.39 as I speak. That's up almost 20%, 19.5%, up $4. And Brent crude is at $30. So those are numbers we haven't heard of in a while. That's up 10.5% here for Brent. And gold, since many people here like it, is down $4 in the spot market, like it in my audience. I'm not giving investment recommendation here. 1.697, 1697 here on the spot, or 1704 in the futures. And since I mentioned the word like, let me just put a disclaimer in here. Not making any security recommendations. So what I want to get to today is a bunch of things happening in the news. Notably, let me start out with maybe a somewhat provocative piece by John Cochrane. He calls himself the grumpy economist. He, at the beginning of this crisis, made the point that perfection is not needed. We need that R0 that you've probably heard of, your reproductive rate, the infection rate, to be less than 1. And so he's kind of doubled down on that, and that's absolutely right, of course. And the whole point of this sheltering in place and all that, let's not forget it, is so that we don't exceed hospital capacity, and then, of course, to save lives as well. But he is pointing out that the dumb reopening might just work. Pointing out that there are various models around the world, and it doesn't really matter what model you're using, they all kind of work somehow. And what he is arguing is that those that say, and this is going to get a little political here, but I try to be an equal opportunity offender, so let's try not to get it too political. But he says that those who say, hey, we rely on science, that they make a big mistake because the science is crap. He uses, I don't know whether he uses that word, but something along those lines. He says the models are very flawed. And the reason the models are flawed is because when you have an outbreak in your neighborhood, you will change your behavior. So these distributions that people come up with to argue why you should have certain things are just not correct. People adjust their behavior. Now, the unfortunate thing about attacking science, so to speak, is that obviously behavior matters. And so if the corollary is that, well, now I can behave as if there was no issue, that is, of course, the wrong conclusion. And so it would be nice to be able to shove the politics aside and all that. It is correct that these models haven't been accurate, and we knew that they wouldn't be accurate, and that we're learning by doing. And but it is still, if you take Sweden, for example, a country that has had very light restrictions, comparatively speaking, mobility has still gone down. And when some of the big tech companies started publishing their mobility data, if you zoomed in on different counties and around the country, in the US here, where infections were very low, mobility data there as well showed a dramatic decline in mobility. So people hunkered down. Maybe they were working for multinational companies and getting to work because the companies were shut for other reasons. But but people do react to fear, and so that in itself will, if you know that somebody is infected in your neighborhood, you might take more precautions in that neighborhood. And so that self-selecting process helps to contain the outbreak as well. So let's keep that in mind. And since we're talking about politics, let's just let me make a comment about the other big elephant in the room. It is about well, let me start it this way around. I had a chat with my daughter, who is a software developer, and she asked me whether I knew why, or whether I've seen at least these little notices on the screens when it says that your network traffic is slow, that when you do a webinar, a Zoom webinar, or even listening to this, right? If the connection speed isn't good, and there's a pop-up in there and says, hey, your connection isn't good. Well, she says, and I think she has a good point, the reason companies put these messages on there is so that you don't get upset at the app. You get upset at the local ISP. Your experience isn't good, and so you got to direct your anger towards something. But the reason I make this prelude is because politics is exactly the same thing. Not everything in the management of the virus has gone perfectly. I mean, it was impossible to have gone perfectly to begin with. Let's just put the politics aside. And so the question is who and what to blame. And so by saying that this virus originated in a lab in China, you are directing that anger away from yourself. And so I'm not trying to defend or accuse the administration of anything. This is just classic politics. And of course, the president is particularly extreme and media savvy in that. I'd just like to make people aware that that's the motivation behind this. And so it makes you more loyal, so to speak, towards your favorite candidate. And obviously, if you don't like what's happening, it's the same thing that's happening, right? You're appalled by it, and therefore you're running more towards your candidate. So it continues to exacerbate the split in politics. So with that out of the way, a bunch of other things happening, though. Lots of opening up, notably in Europe. Greece wants to have vacations possible this summer. Greece says they weren't very much affected, and they attributed to their early clampdown on things, and they want to be open for vacation travelers this summer. Keep in mind, I agree that Greece probably did a good job. One advantage of Greece has been the crisis for so many years. So unlike New York City, where international travelers go there by the millions, literally, it hasn't quite happened in Greece. And so that obviously has helped Greece. Spain, similarly, pointing out that that tourism is essential. So they're working very much on that. And then there are a few other things happening. Let me focus on Germany here, a few tidbits. First, the minor ones, and then the big one. The minor ones is that in Germany, the parliament very early on tried to get a controlled way of asking for refunds. So they passed a law that, hey, you can give a voucher rather than giving cash back in an effort to kind of not have these companies go bust. And they got a setback now with the EU that said, nope, for airline tickets, you got to give cash back if the consumer demands it. And that's part of a set of EU rules that were introduced in recent years on airline traveler rights. And so the flip side of that is you just have to give a bigger bailout to the airlines. So um, for what it's worth. Also, the they are increasing pension payments in Germany for about 1.3 million pensioners. If you worked more than 33 years, your pension is raised to a higher minimum than would otherwise be if you had only low wage jobs during most of those 33 years. Then they are contemplating to come up with an incentive package to incentivize you to buy cars. Environmentalists are protesting that's not the right direction. It has to go towards green cars, I suppose, or battery-driven cars. But anyway, that's in the works. And just on the energy front here, there were some headlines out in recent days that consumption, I believe that was the US, but also some European countries, of green energy was higher than of coal energy. And part of that is because you have all the subsidy happening for renewable energies. And so when you have to reduce energy purchases, well, you use the stuff that's not subsidized. And so you've had more wind, solar, and whatnot energy produced than coal. But let's talk about the big one here. The German Constitutional Court ruled unconstitutional the bond purchases by the ECB of German bonds, of German government bonds. And they said that Parliament should have chimed in on that, and they haven't, and they're not allowed to do it anymore if they don't think of an alternative in 3 months or so. First reaction is the euro is weaker, the spreads are widening in the eurozone. When I looked at the screen earlier, it actually was that the German bonds were high. Actually, right now they're high again. They're kind of it's minimal moves here, but whereas French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, all these are weaker. Not all. I actually see that the Greek bonds are also strengthening. But in any case, this is an interest, and if that is actually going to be the case, then the ECB has to exclude German bonds from its purchases. And as we see in the market reaction today, that may only exacerbate the flight to German bonds. So it's a bit ironic in that. But what is unique about this that this is the first time you have if I'm not mistaken anyway, a state court outrule the European court. And so that's really a constitutional battle. That's as if a state government in the US were to say the Supreme Court is wrong and you got to do something else. And so this is a bit of a constitutional battle. Brussels has miffed about it, as you might imagine. And so we'll see how that plays out. And the German court obviously just gave the rule for the borders within Germany, so to speak. And by the way, that the ECB itself doesn't really buy bonds. It delegates it to the various national central banks. So when bonds are purchased, it is the Bundesbank purchasing the bonds, and so that may part of the reason why there are some issues and challenges here, and how the Bundesbank might have authority to actually dictate that. So this is going to be an interesting one, and going to be very interesting to watch how this affects. And one of the reasons they said is that the side effects just outweigh the benefits of these policies, and so this is not monetary policy. This is something that Parliament has to decide on, and so forth. And then to go back to politics, I can't help it, I suppose. But it was in the news today as well. You might recall that the emails of the Democrats was hacked several years ago. There was an election going on, and so forth. And well, the German prosecutors just indicted a Russian who is already indicted in the US for the hacking of those emails of the Democrats, but that same person, presumably it's a team, but there's a person that's identified as part of the Russian KGB newer version, and that person, a 29-year-old, is alleged to have been the mastermind behind hacking into the parliament of in Germany, and basically most of the parliamentary communication was compromised for quite a while. And so it seems that it's the same team that's been organizing that. And I have another political thing here. I'm gonna maybe skip that here. I've done too much already on this one. And by the way, again, I like to rattle cages. I have my gripes with politicians on the left and the right. I don't think it's helpful to most of the rhetoric that happens on either side, and so um, take it as you wish. If you're offended by anything of what I said, then that probably means that people on the other side of the aisle were just as offended because of something else that I said. Okay, though. So we have the market in a good mood. The question is, as always, how will this unfold? Go on in the medium term? Is all this money sloshing around going to be helping financial markets, or will the bad fundamentals do things? There was this comment out yesterday that one of the major banks said that we've seen the worst in the economy, that the kind of the low point of recession, and that's of course technically absolutely correct as far as the rate of change is concerned. At least that's I would agree with that. We're not going to lose 20 million jobs a month each month going forward. That doesn't mean that, and when the recession is over, once the recovery begins again, not when we're back to where we were pre-recovery. And so, if the history books show a very short recession, that doesn't mean that this won't be painful. The question is how the financial markets um, will work in all of that. So, with that, stay safe out there. I'll call it a day for now. Give me feedback how you like these, whether you like me to continue these even as this crisis is easing. And um, I'll be around. I'm on Twitter. We are hosting webinars and other things. We are also working, by the way, on revamping our chart books, at least the presence on the website and so forth. So we'll follow us, and we'll be in touch. Take care. Bye.